You're very welcome to A Question of Law this evening with me, Cora Sherlock. This is the show where we try to answer your questions on the law, giving you some more information on how the legal system works, what you can expect to encounter in your travels through the legal process, whatever it is, and to just make you feel a bit more prepared and a bit more in control when you are involved in any of the legal processes that we'll talk about, whether you're selling a house, buying a house, maybe considering taking a claim for personal injuries, making a will, changing your will, or doing any of the issues regarding probate through the probate office system. So as I say, we're here on Radio Maria this evening, and I just want to ask everybody listening and to encourage you to send in your questions here to Radio Maria. Let us know what you would like us to talk about on the show. If there are specific things maybe that you've heard in the news, things being mentioned to do with the law, maybe you've watched something about a court case that's cropped up on the news and you think to yourself, I'd like to know a bit more about what is involved there, maybe a bit more about how the judge reached their decision in a particular case, or what sort of things they had to think about, anything like that, feel free to get in touch and let us know what you would like us to talk about on the show. So, that being said, in this evening's show, I thought we would talk a little bit about house selling. Now, this is important because it's in the news today that a survey carried out by the Institute of Professional Auctioneers and Valuers has revealed that a number of selling agents are reporting that sales are falling through because of delays in the conveyancing system. Now, specifically what they are saying is that houses are going sale agreed, so a house is being viewed, purchasers are coming in, potential purchasers are coming in, viewing the house and making a bid, which is then accepted. It's at that point then that the delay kicks in through the conveyancing process. And very often what happens is that the process takes so long that the mortgage approval falls through. Now, what do I mean by that? When you are approved for a mortgage with a bank or a lending institution, the approval will always have a deadline on it. Usually it'll be 6 months, which means that you have 6 months to draw down the mortgage from the date of the approval, from the date of the letter of loan offer that issues from the bank. So what that means obviously is that if there is a lengthy delay that goes past 6 months, well then your mortgage could expire, and that would leave you in a position whereby you wouldn't be able to continue with the purchase, and the seller then wouldn't be able to sell to you because the money isn't forthcoming from the bank. Now, I have to say, in my own experience, something like that would be extremely rare. It would be very rare for mortgage approval to fall in that way or to expire, but it is something that can happen sometimes. There may be very difficult things that crop up with specific sales. Maybe there is somebody that has to sign a document and maybe they're out of the country, maybe they can't be located, maybe there's a big delay in terms of tracking them down, getting the document to them and getting it back and so forth. And all of those delays just drag on, and suddenly there's an issue with the drawdown of the mortgage. You're running out of time, and in the worst case scenario, you do actually run out of time and the mortgage expires. Now, obviously, that's your worst case scenario, but there can be other reasons why sales would fall through without the situation where the mortgage approval expires. And what I'm thinking about there is maybe situations where there might be a school term starting. So maybe a family wants to buy a house in a particular location which is near a school that they want their children to go to, and things are getting closer and closer to the start date. It doesn't look as if the sale is going to close, and for some reason the people in question decide that it's just taking too long. There's maybe another house in the vicinity that they also like. Maybe there was a house that they wanted to buy and they couldn't, they weren't the top bidder at the time, but it's now back on the market. And you could have people who say, look, this process is taking too long to buy this house, this other house is available, let's buy that one instead. Obviously that sort of thing can only happen before contracts are signed, because once the contract is signed, well, then both parties, the vendor and the purchaser, are bound to continue with the transaction. But until the contracts are signed, it is open to either side to pull out. So certainly if the whole process is taking too long, then the vendor or the purchaser could pull out. And that's obviously a big problem in transactions generally, because there is that sort of uncertainty in the market, if you like, in terms of how sales are going through and what sort of speed is involved and all of that. So in addressing this issue, the government has introduced a bill. It's a bill introduced by Mark McSharry, and it is the Sellers Legal Pack for Property Buyers Bill 2022. So that's the piece of legislation that's currently under discussion in the Dáil. I think it goes through the second stage in October of this year, and so it's moving through the Dáil. Once it gets through all of the stages, providing it's accepted at each stage, then it will be passed into law and will become effective essentially. So what does it aim to do? Well, basically the bill intends to speed things up from the conveyancing point of view, and what it does, or how it intends to do that, is to make it a requirement that everything is ready to go in terms of legal documents by the time the property is put on the market. So in other words, what happens at the moment is that it's a little bit different in that the person who owns the house will decide to sell it. They'll contact an estate agent initially, the viewing process begins, and then once the sale has been agreed to a particular purchaser, the property is then described as being sale agreed. And at that stage then the transaction is handed over to the vendor's solicitor, who will put together the contracts and all of the documents that have to be given to the purchaser's solicitor so that the sale can take place. Now, what is happening at the moment is that there is that separate, those two different steps, if you like. So the first step is with the estate agent who agrees the sale for the vendor, and then everything moves to the solicitor, who at that point starts to put the documents together. And what this bill will provide is something new, which will say that the legal documents have to be ready by the time the house goes on the market. So what that really means is that when you are contacting the estate agent to sell your house, you also have to, at that point, contact a solicitor and get them to put together the contracts and all of the documents that will go into the sale ultimately. So it is a bit different. It's combining those two steps together, and it means that you will be dealing with the estate agent and with your solicitor pretty much at the same time. Now, it is a little bit different, but I have to say that most people that contact me will contact me at the beginning of the process. So they're generally thinking about a solicitor when they put the house on the market in the first place. I think most people do it at that stage. I don't think they really put it off, because it's so much in your mind. You think, what solicitor am I going to use? And I think for most people, they want to get the solicitor into the process as quickly as possible. So they do want to talk to a solicitor as soon as possible, just to agree things like the professional fee, to know exactly how much everything is going to cost in terms of additional fees that have to be paid, government fees that have to be paid, that sort of thing. You can get a quote from a solicitor very early on in the process, and most people will want to do that. The difference going forward, if this bill is passed into law, is that you won't have the choice. So you won't be able to say, well, I'll talk to my estate agent initially, and then when the house is sold, I'll get a solicitor on board. You can't do that anymore, because what the new bill will say, again, if it comes into law, it hasn't been passed into law yet, but if it does come into law, well, then you will have to get your solicitor involved at that early stage. You won't have the choice to say, I'll talk to a solicitor later on. So what is going to happen then when you start to sell your house and you contact an estate agent? At that stage, your solicitor will have to get all of the legal documents ready. And the proposal is that the documents would be gotten ready at that point, and that a lot of the documents would be they would be highlighted at that stage, so that there's no delay later on. There's nothing that crops up to do with the documents. You don't need anything extra later on in the transaction, because they've all been prepared before the house is even sold. So that's going to be a big change, because I think the most obvious thing from a work perspective is that a lot of the work is going to be done even before you sell your house. So before the house goes on the market, you need to know that everything is okay in terms of planning. Your solicitor will have to put together the contracts. They'll have to get together various documents that might come in from government offices. And all of that is going to have to be done, as I say, up front. At present, you might contact your solicitor and have a discussion with them while the property is still on the market, but they won't actually do the work in terms of preparing the contracts until the house is actually sold. So that's the way it is at the moment. As I say, it's all going to change. So let's just have a quick look then at the information that the solicitor is now going to have to put together before you put your house on the market. And what it is going to consist of, it's going to be called the Seller's Legal Pack, and it's going to essentially include all of the documents that would be sent to the purchaser's solicitor once the property is sold. So they include the contract for sale itself, and as I know we've discussed in previous programmes on this on a question of law, we've talked about the contract. It includes all of the information to do with the sale that has been agreed. So you're going to have things like the names and addresses of the purchaser and the vendor, their tax numbers, the amount of money that has been agreed, the purchase price, the likely date for closing, so a date when both parties hope that the transaction will complete. The contract also has other things that are particular to each specific contract, and what they will be are things like if there's something specific that you want to put into your contract. Sometimes people put in things like a certain number of contents are being included in the sale. So you might have agreed with the vendor, maybe at the viewing you've said to the estate agent, if you're buying the property, that you'd like to get the kitchen table, you'd like the kitchen table to be included, something like that. That would go into the contract as well. So anything specific, if there's somebody who has the right, for example, someone has the right to cross the back garden to do something, maybe to access a garage or something where they have to do repairs to their own property, they might need to enter onto the property and sale. And that would be included in the contract as well. Just anything particular, specific to the property, all goes into the contract for sale. So that's the first item that will be in the Seller's Legal Pack. The next one then will be the document called the folio, the file plan folio. And this is the government document that proves that the vendor is the owner of the property. So again, it'll set out the description, the address of the property, and it will also state that the vendor is the owner of the property, and it will usually also include a map. So you've got those three things together: the name of the owner, the address of the property, and a map showing the property. So this is done it's a 4-page document with the map generally. So just in a couple of pages, you know all of those three things. The most important things about the property are included in the folio. So the folio then is going to go into the seller's legal pack as well. And after that, you have what's probably, after ownership, is the most important part of the property, which is the planning information. So what that will involve is copies of the planning permissions that relate to the property. So the original planning permission that was granted when the property was being bought. If there was any additional planning permission granted for maybe an extension or for works that were done to the property, well then that will have to be included as well. And then you have the architect's certificates of compliance with the planning permission. And these are important because they are prepared by an architect who says that they have gone in, looked at the property, examined it, inspected it in comparison with the planning permission that was granted. And they just make sure that nothing has been built that wasn't included in the planning permission, so that there's no situation whereby there's any bit of the property that is outside of the planning permission. Everything has to be built as per the permission that was given when the property was first being built. So that will go in there as well. Now the next thing that will go in there are details of the local property tax, the LPT. So that will just include confirmation that the LPT has been paid up to date and that there is nothing that has to be paid by the purchaser. So they'll just be going in with a clean LPT record and nothing will be owing. That has to go in as well. The other thing that has to go in is the letter confirming that any roads and services servicing the property are in charge. And what we're talking about there are things like the water connection, ESB connection, anything like that is taken in charge by the national authority. And what that means is that if there's a problem like with the electricity, then the ESB will send somebody out to make the repairs. So essentially what it means is that some national authority is in charge of that service. The same thing then would apply for water services. And then the reference to roads means that the road is maintained by the council. So any road leading up to the property is maintained by the authority, who'll come out and fix the potholes and all of that sort of thing. So that's that letter. The other thing that you need to get will be a BER certificate and report. And this is a certificate that relates to the energy level of the house. So it's a system whereby your house is given a ranking based on how effective it is in terms of saving energy. So what you do there is you will have an inspector, a BER inspector, who will come out, examine the house and prepare this BER certificate. It'll give the house a range, there's a range of different levels that your house may achieve. So it'll go A, B, C, D, down in that level. Obviously anything up near A is better than any letter further down the alphabet. It is important, and it's something that crops up in the letter of loan offer which will issue from your bank. Very often it'll be a requirement that the house that they're giving the mortgage for has a BER certificate rating of a certain level. So they might say that the BER certificate rating can't go lower than maybe C, on the level. It has to be up to a certain point. And that's why you need to include the BER certificate and report. That'll also go into the seller's legal pack under this new piece of legislation. Then the other thing that will go in is a review of any charges or bankruptcy judgment issues, anything like that affects the property. There are a few ways in which items like that can be, they can affect how the property is. They just need to go with the title deed so that the purchaser knows exactly what's involved. Obviously, if there was a judgment mortgage against the property, that's a very serious thing, because it means that somebody who was owed a lot of money has registered a judgment against the property. And that really is a sum of money that would have to be paid by the vendor in order for you to continue, in order for the purchaser to continue with the transaction. So that's also a very important one as well. So all of those things are going to be in the seller's legal pack, which is envisaged by this legislation. And obviously it is a really important a really important pack that is going to be needed. Now, as you can see, there are going to be some upfront costs for a vendor in that situation, because they're going to have to talk to a solicitor at word go, essentially, or at the very beginning, and get them to put together that legal pack. Normally, as I say, it wouldn't be done until later in the transaction. And the big thing really there about costs is that the vendor is going to have to pay a fee for that letter confirming that the roads and the services are in charge. You need to get that letter from the local authority, and there's a fee for that. It's usually about €75. The other thing that they're going to have to pay for is the folio. So they will have to request a folio from the land registry, and that it has also got a charge. It's currently €40 to get a copy of the folio. There are another few bits and pieces of charges and fees involved at this stage. Obviously, your solicitor is going to take care of ordering them and getting them together. Now, the thing about it is that these are costs that you will incur as a vendor at the early point of the transaction, but they will be required later on anyway. So, I know from a vendor's point of view, it is maybe a bit strange to think that you are incurring costs before the house has even been sold, indeed before it's been put on the market. But those things will be needed further down the line anyway. So you won't be able to complete the sale without the folio. You won't be able to complete the sale without the letter showing that the roads are in charge. All of those things will be a requirement. This just means that you're getting them together. Your solicitor is getting the seller's legal pack together before the property has been sold. But it's just bringing everything earlier, bringing it up to an earlier point, if you like. So that's the new seller's legal pack that is planned. As I say, it's going through the second stage in the Dáil in October of this year. And I think it's probably fair to say that it will pass. I'd be quite surprised if it doesn't pass, because it does incorporate things that you can see will speed the process up. And it's interesting to note as well that that legal pack that we're talking about is something that solicitors are doing as it is. Solicitors put that pack together. They just put it together at a later stage, if you like, when the sale has been agreed with the purchaser. Now, I would have to say that most solicitors that I know, they don't delay on putting that legal pack together. They don't wait. You don't have a situation where the sale is agreed and then the solicitor does nothing for a couple of weeks. That's not what happens. But I suppose by putting this law in place, there is just the intention to highlight it and to highlight the need to keep things moving as quickly as possible. So I just want to talk then, we've got a few minutes left. I just want to mention what you can do even before you put your house on the market. to try and speed up the process as much as possible and to enable your solicitor to put that legal pack together as quickly as possible so that you can get your property on the market. And a couple of the things that you can do is know your property very well, know your house. And by that I mean be very aware of things like planning. So if there is a situation whereby maybe there's an extension that has been built and you're not sure whether planning permission was needed, you need to check that out at this point before you put the house on the market, because there might be something there that didn't get planning permission. There might be an extension that was built just without planning permission at the time, and you really do need to go and make sure that everything is in place. Very often people will, even if they get the planning permission, they will not necessarily get an architect to come in and look at it and just do that job that I talked about a few minutes ago, which is an architect comes in, looks at the planning permission, inspects the property and makes sure that the two coincide, that they're both in agreement with each other. So very often people will build extensions, they might get the planning permission, but they don't always get an architect in until they need it. In a situation like this where they're selling a house, they are going to need it. So if that's the case, just be aware that if there are any extensions built, if there's any works done that would have needed planning permission, check it out and make sure that everything is in order in that regard. The other thing that you can know, or that you just would be a good idea to make sure that you know, are things like the state, the condition of the boiler, condition of the roof. Know if there's been any issues with those, so that you can tell the agent and maybe include anything that might relate to that in the contract. Sometimes people put into the contract that the boiler will be replaced, for instance. So that might be something just to keep an eye on. Just know what the situation is before you put the property on the market. Also that BER certificate that we talked about, the energy certificate, the energy rating. Very often for older houses this isn't a feature, it's not included with the title deeds, because it's only something that is coming in latter years. So you might need to get somebody in to look at that and to prepare the report and the certificate. Obviously that's something that you can do, which will speed the process up. So that's really a kind of a rundown on what's going to be involved in that new seller's legal pack that solicitors will have to put together if this law goes through the Dáil and is accepted. What I would say is that there are those things that you can do as a vendor to make things run smoothly and to make sure that there's no delays in anything. They're very obvious things really for a lot of people, but you know how you can be living in a house for a long time and not know those really specific things about the planning, things about, maybe rights of way. Maybe there's an old right of way that isn't used, but you have, that you've maybe always in the back of your mind that there is something to do with that. Make sure you kind of investigate it before putting the house on the market. Find out exactly what is involved and talk to your solicitor just to confirm the position. Now, I think what will probably happen here is that, that seller's pack is going to be put together very quickly, because there is going to be, discussions, or there's going to be communication between you, the estate agent, and the solicitor. Because if the market is in a good place and you are ready to sell, obviously you want to get things moving as quickly as possible. What I would say as well is just keep in mind that when there are costs that arise at this point, which is a very early point in the transaction, they will be needed further down the road. So they are going to crop up. They're just coming a little bit earlier for that pack than they do at the moment. So look, that's a rundown of the bill. It has to be said that it is only a bill at the moment. It's a draft. of the legislation that would go through. There may be changes to it before it's signed into law. It might not be signed into law, but like I say, I think it probably will have certainly a good chance of going through and just forming part of the property legislation generally. That's it from me this evening on A Question of Law. I hope that has been useful to you. So thanks very much for listening, and be sure to contact us here at Radio Maria with any queries that you might have. If you want to find out a bit more about the process for buying or selling a property, or indeed to get in touch to get a quote and an overall view of the budget that you will need, then do feel free to get in touch with me through my own website, which is corasherlocksolicitors.ie. That's it from me. I will talk to you all again next week.